just repackaged accounting principles that on paper, quote unquote, increase your valuation, but they're not actual value drivers, right? Like categorizing your cell phone bill as a personal or a business expense and adding that back into the EBITA does not really drive value for the business. Yes. Hey, Rafi Salazar with Rehab U Practice Solutions, and wanted to give you an offer, a free offer. I work a lot with healthcare technology companies, healthcare providers, both on transitioning services that used to just be brick and mortar, what we'd consider in physical clinical spaces, to virtual service delivery, whether that be telehealth, remote therapeutic monitoring, you name it. I've helped a lot of organizations implement and integrate those types of technologies into their clinical practice in a way that drives revenue and good ROI for them. And I also help the technology companies themselves as they try to craft a business development strategy in the US market. If that's something you're interested in learning more about, how it works, what I do, that sort of thing, or if you just want to grab a chat, head on over to rehabupracticesolutions.com. I'm sure there's a button somewhere on there that tells you to grab a free 30-minute call with me. I'd love to have a conversation, really just to learn more about what's going on with you, your business, your organization, what your strategic plan is maybe for the future, where you see industry trends going in healthcare, and I'll share some of my own, obviously. We're at the tail end of the year here, so I'm wrapping up a bunch of projects with clients here in 2024. And I always find that opening up time on my calendar for these kinds of conversations leads to something. Maybe it's just an interesting conversation. Maybe it's a good connection that I can maybe refer business to, or that can refer business to me, or vice versa down the line. So anyways, that's the offer. Come grab a 30-minute, I hate the word virtual coffee because that's stupid. We're not going to have coffee. I'm not going to be drinking coffee anyways. Grab a 30-minute slot of my appointment and we'll chat about healthcare technology, innovation, go-to-market and business strategies, and healthcare sales. So there's that. Like I said, head on over to rehabupracticesolutions.com. I'm sure there's a button somewhere on there that tells you book a call with Rafi, and that's what you want to do. If you want me to come speak at your organization, conference, business, corporate, etc., on healthcare innovation, bringing technology to bear in clinical situations, again, you can head on over to speaking.rafisalazar.com, learn more about how to do that. Alrighty, this week, taking some time to do a little bit of a dive onto the provider side. Of course, this works with a lot of these principles are going to be business related in general in healthcare. On what matters when it comes to a business valuation. I had a conversation with Paul Singh from Strata PT the other day, and I was just kind of talking with him about some of the things that have come up recently in my own business, and some of the insights I gained. And we had this discussion around private practice, specifically in healthcare, and what are the real value drivers of a business. And he said something that kind of just in the back of my mind, I was like, oh, I'm going to do an episode on that later. He said, there are a lot of people out there in the healthcare space, and they're trying to sell people in private practice their consulting service or their program or their course or whatever it is, all about quote unquote building value in their business. And it's really the same old shtick over and over again, like make sure your cell phone bill is accounted for properly. And really what they're trying to do is really the courses and those programs and all of that are either a loss leader into like a private practice bookkeeping program or software or something like that, or just repackaged accounting principles that on paper, quote unquote, increase your valuation, but they're not actual value drivers, right? Like categorizing your cell phone bill as a personal or a business expense and adding that back into the EBITA does not really drive value for the business. Yes, it means you can probably sell your business for maybe a little bit more, and maybe you'll get a little bit higher of a payout, but it's not increasing the actual value of the business. It's just paper accounting, right? It's basically how you view or how you are looking at the spreadsheets. So what I wanted to talk about was specifically in healthcare, in service businesses. So like I said, some of this stuff might not apply to healthcare technology firms, but it does. Some of these things are the reason why technology firms sell at higher multiples than private practices. So this is going to be specific for what can you do if you run a healthcare organization to actually increase the value of the business, not just how much you're going to get paid in like maybe a couple thousand extra bucks here and there, maybe 10, 20, 30,000 extra dollars, but like what can you actually do to like increase the actual value where you're talking not just like a 2x multiple of EBITDA, but like 20 or 30x, right? So how do we do that? Some of this stuff is, I'll just back up and kind of give you the story. So I own a private practice myself, Proactive Rehabilitation and Wellness, and I'm not in the market all the time to sell it, but my go-to whenever somebody reaches out and says, hey, would you be interested in selling your business? I always say yes. Not because I want to sell it, but because what follows is usually a long list of due diligence or pre-screening, all of that sort of information that the potential buyer is wanting. And what those conversations and those experiences do for me is they give me insights into what certain types of buyers are looking for in the information, what they consider valuable, what they focus on, what they don't focus on. It gives me a little bit of insight into my own business practices and allows me to see maybe holes in the reporting or the data analytics or even the management structure. What is one thing that this potential buyer had a hold up on or was concerned about? Kind of drill down in more questions that I wasn't prepared for. Were they asking for this number that I didn't have? Were they asking for, were they really focused on this part of the business as opposed to this other buyer, which is in a different, maybe a different type of entity, a private equity firm versus like a strategic buyer or something like that? And what types of information were they looking at? So I've done that over the last 4 years. Every time somebody reaches out and says, would you be willing to, entertain an offer on your business? I always say, sure, because I'm going to go through the due diligence process or the discussions with anybody who's on the buyer side, and it's going to give me insight to become a better business owner and also to get some of this insight into what drives value in organizations. And I don't see this, after Paul mentioned it, I totally went back and like kind of did a clean sweep of the memory banks to think, and I just don't see this being discussed at all in healthcare. Like I said, there's a lot of talk about selling for higher multiples and, maybe getting a few extra, $1,000 here or there, but by adding back some expenses on the accounting side, your add backs, your EBITDA or something like that, but they're not really like orders of magnitude, leaps and bounds greater for you as the business owner or the practice owner. Because really what you're doing is you're just moving little accounting widgets around. You're not driving actual strategic value, which is what we're talking about in a lot of senses when we're talking about value of an organization. What is the strategic value to the potential buyer? So that's kind of like laying the groundwork. So Paul and I had this discussion, and I figured I would just do a deeper dive in this episode. So the first order of business here is when you're talking about what's going to be a strategic value driver for the potential buyer. Well, one, you kind of need to understand what the buyer is. Are they a private equity firm or a PE firm? Are they a large strategic buyer? Maybe they're a corporate chain or corporate subspecialty group, like in physical therapy, for example, maybe ATI or something like that. They're going to acquire your business because the strategic buyers have a couple different reasons why they might do that. Are they part of like a larger health system, which again would be almost a subset of like a strategic purchase? Are you a ancillary healthcare practice, private family medicine practice, or a physical therapy practice or something, and now your local hospital system is looking at acquiring you? Because understanding what the buyer is, the type of entity they are, is going to give you a little bit of insight in what they consider valuable. For example, in physical therapy, I own a physical therapy practice, so we're going to kind of use that as an example. I was approached a while back by a strategic purchaser, we will say. I'm not going to name any names, but they're a large physical therapy chain, essentially. And when we were looking through what is valuable, or what are the things that they wanted a couple different pieces of information. The first piece of information that they were looking for was really all about continuity of the practice after I was gone. Did I have a practice director, a clinical director in place to kind of hand the reins to when I left? Did I have what about the team? Was the team sticking around? What were their specialties, their subspecialties? Did it give them some kind of capabilities? The referral relationships, those types of things. Of course, they wanted to see, revenue per visit and kind of some of those generic metrics, but really a lot of the focus of those conversations was on what happens to this organization after the owner leaves, and how involved is the owner? Are you in there treating 8 hours a day, or are you barely in the clinic? Now, obviously, if in any business, if the owner is an owner operator, you're looking at a smaller multiple, because the value is you, basically. The organization by itself doesn't have a whole lot of value outside of the owner operator. Once you get outside of that and you become more of a removed owner of the business, an actual owner, where you have a team that is providing and directly delivering a lot of those services, and a lot of the revenue is dependent on the team delivering the services, not you delivering the services as the owner, then you step into that next level of multiples, if you would. Maybe you're doing some high-level strategic work at the organization, you're running payroll, you're doing some maybe signing off on big purchases, all that kind of stuff, but the day-to-day operations you're not involved in as much. You're looking at that next level of like multiple jumps. And the way Paul mentioned it was like, if you're an owner operator, you got a small team, you're doing a lot of the work, you're looking at like maybe a 1 to 2x EBITDA multiple, because essentially the business is you're the business. If you're gone, the organization needs to hire somebody to replace you and train them to do what you're doing and drive the revenue with make up for the revenue that they're going to lose by you not being there, right? So that's a big risk for the organization. If you're in the owner stage, then you're looking at maybe in the 3 to 5, maybe sometimes 7 if the organization is big enough. 7 times or 5 times probably is a good average multiple of EBITDA, which means that like if your business is doing $1 million top line revenue, let's say 200,000 in profit at the end of the year, 5 times that would be $1 million. That's kind of what you're looking at, right? And if you're at the level above that, which is like investor, which is like you have a general manager in place, you're not doing anything in the business at all other than reaping distributions or dividends every quarter or something like that. Your day-to-day operations are totally not even in your mindset. Then you're looking, Paul was saying, well, then I'm looking at maybe 20 to 30 times EBITDA, because that is really turnkey. And I think ultimately, when you're talking about value drivers for an organization, any business, that is kind of what you want to get to as the owner. Like you want to get to the point where it is turnkey, so that you can have the option of either continuing to own it and collecting distributions from it, or selling it for a very large sum of money. Now, I'll admit I'm not there in the practice that I run. I will be in the clinic a couple days a month, and it's not even like full days. Most of the daily operations are not dependent on me. I sign off on payroll. I manage some of the finances and stuff like that. I do a lot of the financial reporting, interface with our bookkeepers and stuff like that. All the contracts obviously are coming through me. So I would say that I'm not owner operator, because I don't really, the revenue, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, the revenue's still coming in. Big stuff might not get done, like payroll, but the business does not require me to be working in it to generate revenue. So, and I told Paul that I kind of just fell into that. because when I bought the organization, I bought this practice, it was a physical therapy only practice. I'm an occupational therapist by trade. So I ended up being in a position where for the first 7 months or so, 6 or 7 months, because this was like the height of COVID and everything took forever back then, it just took a long time for me to get credentialed with all the insurance companies for occupational therapy. So I couldn't treat patients. I was in a situation where the business had to make revenue and had to be profitable without me directly, my inputs being required to drive revenue, because I couldn't do it with all our insurance companies, right? Like, sure, I had a couple private pay patients here and there, but for the most part, the revenue was getting in the door because of the therapist doing the work, and I kind of just stepped in as a managerial person. So anyways, that's kind of like the first level there, is like how dependent is the business on you as the owner, because that's going to drive a lot of those. One is going to drive those multiples a lot of ways, but it's going to deload a lot of risk for the buying organization if you're not involved in the day-to-day. And the way I've heard it put by one potential buyer one time is like, well, listen, if you're paying yourself this and you're only in the clinic half a day a month and you're really not doing a whole lot of like daily grind stuff, then you're like something we'd want to get rid of very quickly after we purchase your business, right? Because we want to reclaim all of that, the salary, and divert it to a manager or something else. Like there's revenue, there's a potential instant revenue to be had, or instant value to be created by your departure, right? So when they said that on that call, I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. I'm going to lock that away for future reference. So first big value driver is going to be owner involvement. How involved are you as the owner? How dependent are you on either yourself or any one individual, any one member on your team? And a good way to do this, or to think about this, is like, maybe you're not involved at all, but what happened if one of your therapists or one of your clinicians left, or your front office manager left? How easily would it be to replace them? I'll just talk about how we go about doing that in the business, and then we'll talk about another strategic value driver. So this was a value driver in and of itself, but it also plays into the whole owner involvement piece of it, and that is, how documented are the processes and procedures? So at my clinic, Proactive, we have 2 Excel sheets, and I can't really remember what they're named exactly. One of them is like daily operations manual, and one is like financial operations manual. Basically what they are, though, are they're 2 Excel spreadsheets. We use Google Workspace for everything, so they're like all linked to each tab is linked to different documents and all kinds of stuff. But basically, each tab on that Excel sheet, or that Google Sheets document, is a function, and it is broken down into how to, like, step by step, so that if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, or my front office person walks out of the door and never comes back, or we onboard a new clinician, you can walk them through basically training and onboarding in a morning. And it should be very foolproof. Passwords are all kept in a place where, like, common passwords, common logins, common steps, all of that kind of stuff is held in these 2 manuals for the organization, so that everything on the clinical side can happen, and then everything on the financial side can happen. And if there's any question, and I just did this from the very beginning, like, if a question ever came up and somebody asked me, how do I do this? I would say, either I don't know, go figure it out, or I would say, what does the manual say? And if it wasn't in the manual, we created it. And we do that now to this day. We just onboarded, we just signed a contract with a company to do like pre-employment screenings and stuff like that. We're adding that to the manual, right? The how-tos, where the documents are found on Google Drive. Our Google Drive is super, I'm a spaz about organizing everything correctly, or like maybe not correctly, but organized. Like, every folder has a number and sub-numbers, and they're all very much like an outline, if you would. And then in each of those tabs on the how-to sheet, there might be a link to the scheduling practice. So maybe this is how we schedule. We schedule on 45-minute blocks starting at 8 o'clock, and here's lunch, and this is what it looks like. There's a link on that how-to, that specific how-to, to the grid. So, and that's a Google Doc that the whoever's learning and being onboarded can click that, can actually see a visual representation of what that scheduling grid should look like. And then it allows us to update it in real time. So if we decide, okay, you know what, we're going to cut it off here on this day, or we're going to increase or move the lunch around here, or whatever it is, in real time, all of it gets updated. So we update the scheduling grid, and now boom, the manual is still up to date, which is one thing I really, really love about that. So anyways, so that was one of the things that when this buyer, the strategic buyer, was asking about, well, do you have a clinic director? Do you have people in place? Yada, yada, yada. My answer was like, I really haven't needed it so far, and this is why. And they got very excited about that. They were like, oh, you've got everything documented. So documenting every process that you can and putting it in a way that is easily digestible, easily found, and that drives the actual activities in the business is going to make you as an owner less, not less important, but you don't have to be there doing the decisions, right? Or doing the tasks or answering the questions, because it's going to be in the manual. And I've gone so far as to like create video trainings of specific things that I thought were key. So we have like a Google Classroom set up that, we onboard somebody new, and we would, depending on whether they're a clinician or an admin, they get assigned to a classroom, and that classroom has like a 20 video course, if you would, to onboard. It shows them where to find everything, where the how-tos are, where specific resources are for whether they're a clinician or whether they're an admin. And that's something that's I kind of did it out of just this idea of I just didn't want to answer the same question over and over again. And I wanted to make sure there was a place that it was all documented, that I could always say, because I come from the federal government as a former clinic lead there, like standard operating procedures are important. And then the fact that there might be a disciplinary act or action that needs to be taken, you want to make sure in clear and no uncertain terms that the employee or the team member was provided the information and the resources they needed to do their job, and that there wasn't oversight or neglect. So in my mind as a manager, like having that stuff in place is a good protection for me, because if for any reason some team member is falling behind or whatever, I can go to them and say, listen, on this date we had this discussion, and I gave you the link to the manual. There were 3 or 4 different videos there. There was also a resource document. You had access to it. I know you have access to it because I gave it to you on this date, and you're still falling behind. So it bolsters that case, right? So again, owner involvement, let's decrease it as much as possible. How do you actually do that? You find a way to make sure that the business does not need you as the owner to drive revenue. And that's the first step. Like, you want to replace your revenue driving activities as step number 1. And then step number 2 is like the administrative decisions, the day-to-day tasks, that sort of thing. You want to remove yourself as much as possible from those. And you do that with a manual. So maybe we'll take a little nitty-gritty time and dive into how you actually do that. Sorry, there's a team member walking through up here in the studio. So the main way, and how do you figure this out? Because this is a thing for a lot of people that I've talked to over the years. How do you understand like when you can hire somebody to replace yourself, and how does it work, and the financial modeling? You basically do a break-even analysis, which if you have not done, I want to say maybe I know on the website rehabupracticesolutions.com, under the free download section, I know there's a financial benchmarking tool resource package. It's all free, grab it, whatever. But in there, I'm pretty sure there's a break-even analysis. And what a break-even analysis basically does is you take your revenue per visit, your fixed cost, your variable costs, and the volume of production. And then you use that to calculate how much, at what point does that number, the net revenue generated for the activities, become positive, right? And that's your break-even point. It's going to be negative for a while. So for example, if your overhead is $3,000, let's just say $3,000 a month, right? That's super, super low, I know, but we're going to go with it because it's easy. You get paid $100 a day, or $100 a visit. So one patient or one volume of production or one unit of production is $100. Your fixed cost is $3,000 a month, and your variable cost might be your hourly employee. Maybe you're paying a clinician an hour and you're going to pay him $50 an hour. So what you would do is in the formula, basically you're going to take your unit of production. You're going to see one patient this month. You're going to multiply that by 100, the amount that you're getting per unit of production. And then you're going to subtract that from your fixed cost and your variable cost. And the variable cost might be, okay, you're paying them $50 an hour. They're going to see one patient in an hour. So for every unit of production, you're basically paying $50. So that variable cost rises as the number of patients you see rise, right? And basically what you're doing is it's total revenue minus the sum of your fixed and your fixed and your variable costs, right? And then whatever that is, if it's negative, it means you're in the hole and you have to increase that volume of production. And what happens over time is that with the greater the amount of production, sooner or later the revenue outpaces the growth of the your variable costs, right? And you're just looking for that where those two lines intersect, and then anything over that you're profitable, anything under that you're not profitable. So what I did was I did the basic break-even analysis, and I did it two ways. I did it one with Rafi working, and then one with Rafi not working, not driving revenue at all, and what it would mean for like the target salary that I wanted and all the other expenses, right? So it was basically Rafi treating, Rafi not treating. And I ended up just deleting the Rafi treating one because I realized I didn't want that to happen. So my break-even analysis is based off of if I'm going to pay myself the same amount, we're going to pay our clinicians, pay all our bills on time, we're going to remain profitable. This is how many patients we need to see per month in order to break even or be profitable. And then it's just a matter of figuring out, okay, given that I can afford to pay a clinician X because that's what's in the break-even analysis now. What if I pay them a little less? You can input that number and see what happens. What if I pay them a little more? You can input that number and see how it changes. What if I see more patients or less patients? What if we do, you can play with it all different kinds of ways. Basically, the break-even analysis is the key to understanding, okay, if I'm not working at all, how many patients do we need to see to make that happen? And basically what I did was I took my salary and I added it as a fixed cost. So we were going to cover that eventually, right? And for us at the clinic, it ended up being like we need to see something like 14 patients a day or something like that without paying me anything to break even. And it was like 20 or 24 patients a day, whatever it was. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've looked at it. In order to pay me a salary and have me not work, right? Because it was built in as a fixed cost. So that's the actual mechanics, the tactics about going around figuring out how you do that. So the big piece is understanding the financial metrics and what it takes to do that, how many patients or the volume of production you need in order to hit that number where you can pull yourself out entirely and the business is not dependent on you as the clinician. And then the other piece of that is these policies and procedures and manuals so that even when you're not treating day to day, you're not responsible for the day-to-day tasks. Because even if somebody has a question about the tasks and how you check somebody's benefits or what do we do if we have a delinquent account or whatever it is, it's in the manual. They can do it. They can just follow the process and the procedures that you've already laid out. So that's piece number one is owner involvement. The second piece is strategic value that makes the organization itself, the TIN or the tax ID number, the entity, valuable versus the assets. Now, again, I am not an accountant, but there are tax implications for whether or not you sell the business as an asset sale or whether you sell the stock of your entity to the buyer. Now, why would somebody purchase the assets versus the stocks? Well, there's going to be a lot of different reasons, but the main reason that I've seen in like the clinical space is something like payer contracts or payer contracts and credentialing in whatever geographic location. So for example, there might be a clinic that's operating, or a practice is operating in South Carolina. They want to operate in Georgia, but that requires getting, because these companies, even though they're national, they have contracts with each state. So like Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, the contract is going to be different than the Blue Cross Blue Shield of Georgia, and the credentialing is going to be different. You need to get credentialed with each of those entities, even though they're the same giant, conglomeration of companies. There are two options that a practice has if they want to expand into another state. We can go from the ground up. We can do de novo, or start from scratch, pull those contracts, begin the negotiation, find a space, to either lease or buy, hire and credential all the employees, work through the negotiation process with the payers, et cetera, et cetera. And that's looking at, okay, that's going to take 6 months to a year sometimes to get all of those pieces in place. Or the other option is we go in, we buy a clinic or a practice that's the same specialty as us in that geographic location. We retain all of those contracts as part of the purchase, because we're going to purchase the entity itself. And we're going to maintain the staff. The team will be in place and they'll already be credentialed. So basically, it shortens the time required for them to make money on that investment, right? Because if they buy it as an asset sale, meaning we're not going to buy the company at all, the company, the actual entity, we're just going to buy the goodwill, the patient list, maybe the equipment in the clinic, and the policies and procedures that run the clinic. So the assets of the business as opposed to the entity itself. If they do that, then they have to start from the beginning of basically credentialing everything and doing whatever. So when I bought the business, I did buy it as an asset sale. And the reason I bought it as an asset sale was basically because there wasn't much there in the business to buy. There was no, thinking back on it, maybe I would have saved some time if I had purchased the entire stock of the business. But there are tax implications and stuff like that. Apparently, if you're doing an asset purchase, you can write off some of the depreciation and stuff like that. I'm not an accountant. Again, I really don't understand how a lot of that works, other than when I was talking to my accountant a while back about potentially selling the practice. He was like, well, if you can do it as a stock sale, that's going to really be beneficial for you in the long run of that tax year. And I was like, okay, noted. I don't know why, noted. I'll figure the why out later. But anyways, so mine was a small deal, and we did it as an asset purchase. And what we did was we established an interim operating agreement with the previous owners that basically said, in the time frame while the new entity is getting up and running and credentialed and contracted, we'll run operations through the old entity. And there was, we signed BAAs, and it was basically they were subcontracting for our organization until we had our contracts in place and the payers in place. And that's kind of how we manage it. But there may be instances where selling the actual entity itself might be valuable, or the entity itself might hold value outside of the assets. For example, and this is an example I used one time with when I was talking with Paul about this, is like our organization in our state is a Medicaid comp provider, which is Comprehensive Supports Waiver. It's a Medicaid waiver service or Medicaid waiver program, which requires a totally different credentialing process and a totally different contract and payment schedule and everything than regular Medicaid. Why is that valuable? Well, it's going to be different on each state, but in Georgia, there's only 3 waiver providers in the entire state. We are one of them. And there's a list of, I can't remember how many, tens of thousands of people that qualify for the waiver and that don't have services. So it's a huge unmet market, huge potential to grow that area of the business. And it takes 4 years, give or take, to become credentialed. Without getting into the nitty gritty, I knew the right people to call at the organizations to become credentialed with this waiver program, because I had been a consultant with this organization. It's run by Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. So I knew all the people to call that were like, my job as a consultant before buying this practice was like we did a lot of provider recruitment and readiness and training and the whole 9 yards for the department on this waiver program. And we knew it was very difficult to get waivers or waiver providers onboarded. So I was like, this will be great. I was told before that, oh yeah, we know you, we can bypass some of the stuff because we know that some of your work that as a consultant we can use in lieu of some of the requirements for credentialing. Well, that didn't happen. So it still took 4 years, give or take. I bought the business in 2020 in October, and it was like August of 2024. So just a couple months ago that we became like an official waiver provider in Georgia. So you're talking just about 4 years, 3 years and 10 months. But that's a huge moat if you're considering, and it also opens up the potential buyers, not just to like physical therapy clinics or maybe private equity firms, but now because we hold this contract, we could potentially be an attractive acquisition for an organization that serves this type of population in other ways, maybe personal care homes or things like that, and they want to add this capability as a revenue driver. So that move alone, like that, those 2 contracts that we have with those 2 different waiver programs, makes it very, very attractive, and the calculus much different for the potential buyer to buy the actual stock of the business, to buy the TIN and not just the assets, because of that contract that we hold. The same would be true if you, and I've seen this happen a couple times too, where a clinic wants to get in network with a certain provider for whatever reason, a certain payer. They can't, so they purchase a clinic that is in network, right? So something like that. The contracts that you hold, any strategic moats that come associated with the TIN versus the assets of the business can also help increase the strategic value. And that is a strategic value too. A strategic value driver is the fact that you might hold certain contracts that are coveted or that are very difficult to get or that have high pay rates, et cetera, and being able to position those in a way for the potential buyer to see that and say, listen, look, these contracts maybe they're paying above market rates for whatever your specialty is, or maybe you have some sort of perk or benefit in the contracts that they aren't doing anymore, right? Maybe it's something that's grandfathered or something. Being able to sell those to the new buyer is going to be huge, right? That's a strategic value driver. And those are the 2 big ways that I see actually increasing the value of the business. Not just like on paper, the accounting, like maybe adding a couple thousand in EBITA add backs for you, but like how do you actually get bigger multiples and become more attractive strategically to potential buyers? Those are the 2 ways, right? You come up with, number 1, you're going to remove yourself from the day-to-day operations of the business, and that includes any activity that requires your direct input to drive revenue. So if you're a clinician, it means you're not treating to drive revenue anymore. The business is going to survive and thrive without you being a direct driver of revenue. And then also the administrative. It's not going to require you to make decisions or to do any of the day-to-day operations. That's going to be handled by the team that you put in place and the policies and procedures that you develop in order to make that happen. The second way you're going to really drive value in the organization is going to be through, maybe we'll call them strategic moats. Maybe it's specific contracts that you hold with payers or partners or referral relationship, whatever it is that is going to be tied to the business itself and not your goodwill. Like I said, like the example that I used a little bit earlier is like maybe you have a specific contract with a specific payer, or you are credentialed and licensed and whatever and contracted in the state, the geographical region or location, because that can be a value driver. And if that's really what you want, then that's what you look for in the potential buyer. Someone or an organization or an entity where you can add that strategic value by nature of those things you have in place, those contracts, the location, etc. Okay. Now a little bit about actual metrics that matter in these value drivers, right? Because again, without going into the whole accounting piece, like I don't want to beg for the scraps from Longshanks's table, I don't want to be fighting over bits and pieces here on EBITDA buybacks. I want to have real factors or topics or whatever that I can point to that drive value and increase the multiple, not just how many thousands of dollars can I add to the already low multiple that I'm going to get, but how can I actually increase that multiple? So I don't really care. I mean, I do ultimately care about the books being correct, right, and compliant. You want to make sure you're accounting appropriately. You want to make sure you have a bookkeeper that's doing that for you, that you're not claiming deductions or expenses that aren't actually expenses. Like obviously be legal and do that. In my mind, that's why I hire a bookkeeper and accountant, right? They're going to do that and make sure that I'm compliant and that we're accounting the way we need to account, right? So there's that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about actual metrics that you can look at every day, and that some of these buyers want to see whenever they're looking at potentially buying your practice. So I came up with 4 main metrics that you should just know off the top of your head, because they're going to help, one, show that you understand how the business works, but 2, that you understand what the potential business is buying you, what they consider valuable, right? The organization that is buying you is they're doing a financial analysis of your business to see what the value is, right? So you want to understand what those drivers are, the things that actually drive those financials for the business, so that you can have a better understanding when it comes to the negotiation piece as well. The first one is customer acquisition cost. I feel like nobody really understands this, but the way you need to calculate this is, are you running ads? Are you paying a marketing person? I even lump in like the administrative cost of like setting up a case in the EMR, like getting a patient onboarding. That counts to me as a customer acquisition cost, because until they have the evaluation completed and they sign a plan of care and they're there for whatever the plan of care is, it's all activities working towards new business, right? It's all new business development. So customer acquisition costs, it's going to include across all your ad channels, if you're spending marketing dollars on advertising or marketing somewhere else, or if you have a business development person or a salesperson, a rep or something like that. And then the onboarding piece, what does it actually take for them to swipe their credit card or give you cash or whatever? That's a number that you need to know off the top of your head, because maybe like a strategic, maybe a large chain in the physical therapy world, maybe they don't care as much because they're just going to kind of lump you into their process of doing business. But if it's like a private equity firm or something like that, where they're not going to be involved in the day-to-day operations and they're trying to look at the value of the business from a purely financial sense, one of the big factors that they want to know is how much is it costing you to get a patient, because that helps us understand how much we're going to have to spend in revenue or in future investment in advertising to keep the flywheel going. So customer acquisition cost. So we calculate it by taking the total cost of your ad spend, total cost of your hourly or your salary, whatever you're paying your business development manager, and then I lump in the cost that it takes to get the patient onboarded before their first appointment, because it's all business development activity. So that's customer acquisition cost. The next metric you want to follow is the lifetime value of each patient. So you can do this on an average, but what you want to do is you want to see a good way to calculate this is how much revenue you're making per visit and how many visits are there, for example, in a plan of care, or how many visits does a patient typically have at your organization. And I do it on a rolling 6-month basis. So out of 6 months, if Rafi comes to the clinic, how many visits is he going to complete in those 6 months? You can do it quarterly if you want to. You can do it yearly. It's going to depend a little bit on your specialty. And then as a percentage, how many of those patients are coming back is always a good thing. But really, it's lifetime value. If a patient comes in on January, some clinics that I know will calculate this January to January. So like January 1 starts a new cycle. Rafi comes in, how many visits is he going to complete this year? Lifetime value for that year, right? Or you can do the total, which is a little harder to calculate. I tend to do it every 6 months, about every 6 months, how many visits, and I do it per length of care and completed visits and all that. But lifetime value of each patient. So you need to understand the next metric is revenue per visit. And you can look at this through billing reports. I tend to do a weighted revenue per visit, which means I look at, next metric will be payer mix, but I look at my payer mix. I look at the percentage of claims for each payer that have gone out in a given month. And then I calculate a weighted revenue per visit. So I could look at like the month, and I do this every month. So every month in like September, for example, I'll look and see how many, as a percent, how many claims went to Blue Cross Blue Shield, and Blue Cross Blue Shield pays X. How many claims went to Humana? Humana pays X, and there's percentages. And then what ends up happening is it calculates a weighted revenue per visit based off of the actual claims that were submitted, because you're collecting, every 2 weeks to 40 days or something like that. So it gives us a good idea to budget for the next month. Okay, this month we were at 30% Blue Cross, which means it was going to bump up our revenue per visit by X number. So anyways, revenue per visit is something you need to know, because again, they're going to calculate how many visits you're seeing in a month, revenue per visit, how much is your capacity, and then they can extrapolate how much there is to get there. The other thing they're going to want to know is payer mix, because sometimes payer mix has huge swings or can create huge swings in the revenue per visit. For example, TRICARE in our area, we have the military base here. They pay really low, but sometimes the volume is very high. So some months when our TRICARE volume it seems like every so many weeks when they get a new crop of new people getting stationed at the fort or something like that, they'll send a lot of referrals out, and we'll see our number of TRICARE referrals go up. We'll also see a subsequent decrease in our revenue per visit, because it means we're seeing more TRICARE. So we might be staying busier, but it's less revenue. So managing payer mix is big as well from an organizational standpoint. I'm not going to talk too much about that here, but understanding those dynamics is important as well. Especially because the entity that might be purchasing you, maybe they're a strategic, they're a healthcare system, or they're a bigger practice, like bigger physical therapy chain. Maybe they know that they have like a capacity issue with this higher payer. Maybe it's Blue Cross Blue Shield. They have some doctors, or maybe it's a workman's comp or something like that pays very well. They just don't have the capacity. They're looking at your organization and they're saying, okay, your payer mix, you don't have a whole lot, if any, of this type of payer, and that makes it more valuable for us to purchase you, because we can infuse those higher payers into your, like our capacity problem can now be your revenue, your payer mix fix, right? Some synergies there. So anyways, those are the 4 big metrics that I would look at. And those 4 metrics can also help you with those strategic drivers, those strategic value drivers, because if you know how much your revenue per visit is, you know how much your customer acquisition cost is, you know what the lifetime value is, then it helps you put the pieces in place for those financial, maybe break-even analysis to understand what it's going to actually take for you to get away from the clinic, how much you're going to have to spend on ads in order to drive this volume of production to hit this number of visits. That means that you're out of the clinic, right? So all of these things should work together for you. I don't want any of this to be one of those things where it's like, I feel like I'm doing this in a silo and this in a silo. It should all work together to increase the value of your business, and not just like chintzy accounting ways of improving the value of your business, where we're talking about adding a little bit here and the add back or whatever, but actually giving your organization some strategic value drivers that can help you in the negotiation if you're going to be planning on selling the business anytime soon. So anyways, that's all I've got this week. Hopefully you find that insightful. If you want more content like this, or you want to pick my brain specifically about this for your organization and maybe how I can help you do that or increase those numbers for you, shoot me an email. Or go to the website, like I said at the beginning, rehabupracticesolutions.com. There's all kinds of buttons there to book a call with me. Book a call, we'll have a conversation, and I'd love to learn a little bit more about your practice, what's going on, what specific value drivers you're focusing on, and if there's a way I can help. I always tell people it's free, it's 30 minutes, and the worst thing that happens is you hopefully have an interesting conversation. Anyways, I think that's it. If you like the show, head on over to iTunes, leave us a rating or review, or share it with somebody that you find or you think would find it valuable. That's it. Until the next time, be safe, be healthy. I'll talk to you then.